Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for accepting this interview.
You're welcome.
My first question is, what is a good musical composition for you?
I guess you start with the most difficult question, huh? What I look for when I listen to music is music that, on the one hand, as a sensorial experience, grabs me, fascinates me, that talks to me. So on a sensorial level, and combined with that, music that's also conceptually that conceptually also talks to me, that also has as conceptual layers. So I think these two elements are really important for me, and how they talk with each other. And of course, the sensorial part, or the experiential part, well, experiential is not a good word, because the conceptual part is also part of this experience, but the sensorial part can really be very broad. It can be just purely auditory, or it can also be something visual, or it can be something theatrical, or something in combination with other media, or doesn't necessarily have to be in a concert hall. It can also be something that happens outside, but like the experience of it. That's what I mean with that. Yeah.
And maybe you can say or name some last piece which corresponds to those two criteria.
A recent piece that I admire a lot, and that definitely contains both layers, is Scenes from the Plastisphere from Rama Gottfried. Rama Gottfried is an American composer currently living in Berlin. And this composition is, it's really fascinating. He himself calls it a video puppetry instrument. And it's a combination of video, but also they're not instrumental performers, but the musicians actually play objects, which are then filmed. And there is an algorithm that uses the visual information and transposes that into sounds. So the objects themselves become instruments. And at the same time, it's also visually really beautiful. And it speaks to many things that have to do with today's society. He, for example, uses both plastic objects. It's called Scenes from the Plastisphere. So it refers to the ecological disaster that we're experiencing, where plastic, for example, is everywhere. And in the recent versions of this piece, he, for example, also uses plants in combination with plastic objects. There is also the agent of the human agent, fingers and hands are used. So it's a very, it's both really, it draws you in as an experience, but it also really talks to things that we are experiencing today. And so for me, that's, for example, that's a good example.
And regarding your music, what's your musical idea or your musical signature?
I don't know what my musical signature is. That is hard for me to say. But what is important to me musically, or when I compose, is, well, the two elements that I already mentioned, that it is something that speaks directly, something that doesn't need program notes, let's say. So it's really an experience that you immediately, that immediately communicates with you, but on the other hand, something that also speaks on a layer below. So that is something that is really important for me. And I'm very fascinated, as you know, I'm very fascinated by technology and by how technology changes our lives and what it means in today's world and how one can use it in art, how you can turn it upside down or do things with it that are not supposed to be done with it. Yeah, find a constructive way of subverting it or putting it in a different context and in that way revealing again what it is. That is something that really fascinates me. And so that happens in several pieces of mine.
For example?
Well, for example, Generation Kill is a piece where that happens quite explicitly, probably one of my most explicit pieces. Also the Piano Hero cycle, many pieces, Not I, which is actually doesn't contain any visual elements, or let's say besides the performance, but it is also a piece that is about how technology infiltrates the agency of a performer. Infiltrationen, I think actually pretty much every piece I've written in the last 10 years somehow deals with that.
You mentioned that you, let's say, you are fond of technology, and this technology is one trigger for you, right? Opportunities technological. But can you name at least some kind of free, very important technological artifacts? I don't know which impacts you a lot. Could it be like, let's say, softwares or hardwares or sensors, like anyone?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think pretty much everything you mentioned. So hardware, for example, smart devices, which I use quite explicitly, for example, in Mirrorbox extensions, but which I also used in the Corona version of Fitting Inside, which you also experienced. Laptops, in any case, not only in the production phase of making a composition, but also sometimes in the composition itself. For example, in Infiltrationen, the laptops are the way that I communicate instructions with the performers. So the score is generated on laptops, which are in a network.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, I also use a laptop just to create sounds, for example, with Max. So then we are in the software world. Max MSP is very important to me. Also just DAWs like Reaper, I use a lot. Other hardware devices, for example, I also often use mixing tables for no input mixings, or also my smartphone I use often to make recordings of things and then integrate it into pieces or not, or a field recorder, also a very important artifact, I think, which allows, yeah, a lot of new ways to interact with the surroundings. And then there are things like internet, of course, and networks, which are neither software nor hardware, but is also really something that impacts both the production of music, but also how music can be represented, something that we have experienced very clearly now in Corona, where suddenly everything moved online, or half online, half in the physical world. So I think all those things are really important and have transformed and are transforming music.
Mm-hmm. And what's your way of composing? How you start, and what are the stages you're going through as a composer?
That varies, but very often I start with an idea, which often is more of a conceptual idea. And then from there on, I develop top-down often the composition. So for example, Generation Kill, the idea was to look for a way where the physical presence of a performer and a virtual version of this performer creates a hybrid performer. So once I imagined the situation with the semi-transparent screen in the projections, and then the controlling of those projections through the game controllers, from that point on, I started to think about, okay, the software, which then was developed with Josiah Oberholzer at Harvard. So we developed the software, which then gave a lot of sound examples and possibilities. And then from there on, I developed the interactions with the performers and also the sounds for the live performers. And then from there on, I wrote the score. So it's really kind of a top-down thinking in that piece. Also with Piano Hero, it was very similar. Sometimes it also starts more from playing with sounds. So in Piano Hero 3, for example, well, there was also first the idea of the piano as a augmented instrument. So I use a piano with feedback, and the piano itself is a kind of a filter in this loop. And so that was also a conceptual starting point. But then from there on, I went to a studio. I developed together with Florian Bogner. We developed the software and tried sounds and looked for interesting things. And so it was really very much like a child playing with the sounds and then discovering what is working and what isn't. And then that goes into the composition. What very often is an important part of the process is the collaboration with the performer. I really love to work with performers who also have, with whom I can really workshop. So a great example now, for example, is how I am developing the electric guitar concerto with Jaron Deutsch. Jaron is not only an incredible performer, but he's also really open to experiment, to look for things. And we have had already, like, I don't know, hundreds of Zoom sessions where I would ask him something about, I have a guitar here and a pedal, you can probably see behind me, and a little pedal setup. So I try some things and then I ask him, okay, and what if you, what can you do with that? What if you add some other pedals to it? And then he comes back and he says, hey, but did you think of this? Look, this is another sound I found, or this is another interaction. What perhaps it can be useful. So I really like this feedback loop. And I think most of my, if not all of my pieces have worked like that. Almost never did I just write a piece without contact with the performers, and then at some point I give the score and here, this is, you have to play this now. It is always something that really, so far, that has really been developed together.
It's interesting that you at least mentioned two pieces where you, let's say, co-created some software. Is it so often for you, right? That writing pieces means to co-create software.
Yes, yes, I think that's something very much of the last 20 years. But yeah, very often and so, for example, I will answer your question in a second, but I wanted to give another example. I'm developing another piece. It's more of it's not a concert piece in the sense of it will be in a concert hall, but it's something that will happen both inside and outside with network interactions, etc., which I will write for Nadar in the future. But there too, we're actually, for what we want to do right now, the technology is almost there, but it's not ready yet. So we're waiting a little bit still before the technology will be able to do what we want to do. But then once it's there, we actually will have to develop some kind of app for the piece to be able to work. So yes, indeed, it means developing software, which either happens in Max or some specific software. And in the past, I was able to do a lot of that myself, but I'm more and more collaborating with other people who are much more specialized and know better how to program. And yeah, it's somehow one of the downsides of writing the kind of music that I do and many contemporary composers of today, because it's not just writing the notes, it's also writing software. And the musical structures, like the institutions who, for example, commission composers, they're not entirely ready for that yet, because the commission money very often is only for writing the music. But sometimes some commissioners start to understand that and then also offer a little bit of extra funding for the programmer. But it is something that is still not really considered the normal situation.
And how your music changed in the last 10 years, right? Comparing Stefan Prins, right? Stefan Prins as composer and his music in this year and let's say year 2010.
Whew, that's a super difficult question for me to answer. 2010. Well, a lot of things have influenced me in the past 10 years, but perhaps one of the biggest influences was my time at Harvard. I think I was there for 4 years, with 4 years of lessons, of classes, and of interactions with my colleagues there. And in those 4 years, I think my music has changed a lot, or I feel that it became richer in a way, or at least as a composer, I feel that I was able to reflect much more through my music and about my music in more dimensions. So that was definitely a very big thing that happened in the past 10 years. Apart from that, of course, what I have seen from other composers, whether it's music I liked or really didn't like, but all those experiences have changed me, and my music. So if I would have to be more concrete, which is tricky, I would say I think my music has gained dimensionality.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in several ways I was able to find, I hope, a richer world, a richer language, a richer experience.
And what do you fear as a composer the most?
I guess my music becoming irrelevant, or starting to just repeat myself over and over again, which would lead to my music becoming irrelevant, not evolving anymore, which is the same. I think those are definitely things that I fear.
What do you mean by to being irrelevant?
Yes, that question was to be expected. Yes, because of course it's very arrogant to think that you are relevant, or that my music is relevant. But I think it's not so much about how it is received by the audience, but it's more my personal feeling of being relevant or not relevant. So I guess it has to do with feeling that I am connecting to the world with my music.
Connected to the new music community or not? This or
not only.
You mean or outer world?
I mean actually much more.
Anything like what's or social inequality, all that's word, right?
Yeah, so I mean much more the world outside the new music community. Because yeah, I think the moment that I would feel that my music is just talking to the new music world, then I would probably feel quite irrelevant.
Good.
I think it really is important for me to personally, completely independent from what the reaction is of the audience or how the audience receives it, the reception, but that I really feel that, okay, with this piece, actually, I am talking about this, even if it's not really concrete, but I am somehow connecting to the world.
Yes, yes, got it. And this question of Francois, why are you still composing, right?
Because I know no other way of living. I think it's the only, at this point in my life, I think it's the only way that I can be happy.
Good. So it's a question of happiness, of your happiness.
It's a question, yes, but that is connected to many other things. So it's a question of necessity. It's like breathing. When I don't compose for a few weeks, I just start to get extremely nervous and really getting down. And I need this feeling of creating, and my medium is mostly sound. I love to listen. I love to work with sound. I love to make constructions. So if I don't do that, I become really unhappy. So yeah, I guess that is the on probably, yeah, there's one very important level of why I still compose.
And like looking not in your music but on music of new music in general, right? How, and let's say last 25 years, how all this landscape or musical language change? What?
Well, digital technology has been really a game changer. Internet has been it has, of course, also hardware like laptops, which became super powerful, cameras, which became cheap and powerful, network technology with which you can connect many computers to each other or many cameras, smart devices. So all those things have not only changed the structure of music or how compositions are, or yeah, how compositions are, what it means for something to be a composition. It has also changed how the vocabulary of music. So samples, you can find pretty much all possible samples online. So it's very easy to use those, which then of course also immediately brings some kind of musical thinking with it. For example, there are some pieces by Matthew Shlomowitz where he uses samples which would completely be unthinkable in 1980, because the way of thinking of cutting and playing with samples is something that really comes from this entire archive that is online. Also, what Johannes Kreidler does, for example, those things are really very much connected to that technology. So yeah, the grammar of music has changed a lot because of these technologies. The vocabulary of music has changed a lot. The audience of music, I think, also is changing quite a lot, because suddenly, well, on the one hand, music in the 80s, 80s, 90s, music really, let's say a lot of the new music, and I'm really simplifying things here. So I'm absolutely open for counterattacks. But I think music has become very much music about music, or music for people who write music or who are living in music. And I think that is starting to open up again.
Yes.
Partly because there is such a platform as internet where many people can see music, experience music, which also somehow obliges composers to take that into account. And of course, another thing that is related to all of this as well is that music has become much more multidisciplinary over the past years. The borders between different art forms, or on the one hand, and also different media, have been blurring more and more. So the idea of hybridity is something that is very much of today, I think, in many, many ways. And sometimes it's impossible to say if something is an installation, or is it a composition, concert piece, or is it a performance? Or, for example, to go back to scenes from the Plastisphere of Rama Gottfried, it's really kind of everything together. Is it a performance? Is it, yeah, it's a composition too, but it's also more like an installation. It's so I think that's also very much something of today, and something that has changed a lot in the last 25 years.
But I understand from you that let's say the biggest part of this is due to some technological change, right? Some musical genres would be unimaginable, right? Or let's say let's say electroacoustic music would be hardly to imagine without laptops, right? So, because the composers, not all composers have opportunity to work in huge laboratories, and then now maybe softwares, how you deal with video and etc. Again, this wouldn't drive this all multimedia so highest now, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a huge part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
The democratization of all this democratization of technologies and availability of technologies that drive, let's say, music scene quite a lot, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And your feeling where it goes, let's say, what will be in the next 10 years, or where?
Big game changers, I think, will be 5G.
Yes.
Artificial intelligence, new hardware like VR goggles, or even more like the augmented reality goggles that will, I think, in 10 years, I'm sure, will be as widespread as smartphones. Well, probably, I guess. So those tools, I think, will change music really on many, many levels. The compositional level, because as soon as you can get artificial intelligence creative packages that everyone can use in a simple way, then that will have an incredible impact. And also on how music is experienced. If you have VR goggles, you can experience music in a completely different way than when you are in a concert hall, etc.
Just Stefan, it was very, very, very interesting, because the first technology which you mentioned, which will be change makers, was 5G. Can you explain it? Because you were the first one.
Really?
Yes, about that.
Well, 5G will make data transmission so quick that it will be possible to, on the one hand, for example, delay in networks, in networked connections will be so short that, for example, it will be really easy to, with Zoom, for example, now we saw many attempts of people to improvise together or to make music together over the network, which still is not really doable because the network still is too slow and you always have the delay, and the quality is still not so high. But with 5G, that, for example, will change tremendously. You will have very quick connections. You will have high quality video streaming possible. So that will change, that will create a completely new ecosystem. you will also be able to, for example, in combination then with VR technology or augmented reality technology, that will become something that you can use remotely on the streets because you have this super quick connection. So I think that will really change a lot in the music world. Also outside music, of course. The whole idea of the Internet of Things becomes very, very close, and with 5G, that will become something that is within reach.
Yes.
Still not really the case, but.
For me, it's very interesting how this all Internet of Things concept, how it plays out in new music. There are some composers, or can you give examples?
Of which specific things?
Yes, Internet of Things, right? So that you put a lot of internet, I don't know.
Right now, I don't. I cannot really.
Sensors is one thing, right? We always that, right? Sensors, let's say, that is one thing, right? Example of Internet of Things in the music is all the sensor stuff, right?
Ah, yeah, for example.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess so. Yes, absolutely. I cannot really give, for example, well, in that sense, it's hard to give examples because the technology is not there yet. So,
Alex, the Schubert work, this augmented conductor, could it be?
Sure. No, I don't think it has. I mean, it's just Bluetooth technology there, and it's pretty much game technology. It's a Wii remote that is being reappropriated. So that is more technology from the game world that is being reappropriated. I think, and perhaps we are just not able yet to imagine what the changes will be with those technologies. Is something that that's also one of the exciting things for me with technology. You don't really suddenly it is there, and then it's like you get a new toy and you can break it open and do something completely different with it, but you cannot really understand what it is or what it does until it's there.
And what was the first, let's say, what was the first technology which so fascinated you as a composer, right? Because you said you're very technologically oriented, right? So even you describe a lot of, and I would say, future of music regarding technology, which very much resonates with me. But what was the starting point from you, right? I don't know.
I think the loudspeaker. The first time I had the feeling that I really used technology in a smart way, with which I'm not saying that with which I'm actually only saying that I wrote a few pieces where I think I didn't use technology in a very smart way when I was studying. But then at some point I started to think, okay, what is this actually? What is this technology? Because I'm not a big fan of using technology just for the sake of using technology. What is important for me is that the use of technology is really embedded in the composition itself, that there is a real important reason to do it, and that with the composition you somehow even reflect on the technology, or that you make it clear that this technology is essential to it. And so I think the moment that I started to think about a loudspeaker, what that is, what that means, what it makes possible, that was the moment that I started to think about virtual reality, but not really yet in these words, but where I was thinking, okay, you can have a performer playing live, but then what happens if exactly the same thing that the performer would do live is played on a loudspeaker? How is that different in the experience? And so that is, for example, really important in the composition Not I, for electric guitar, where the electric guitar is not connected straight to the amplifier, but actually first goes to the computer, and then this line goes to the amplifier, and the computer interrupts or takes parts of the signal line and replaces replaces it with fake versions of electric guitar. Or so I think that was a very important starting point for me to think about physicality of a performer and virtuality of a performer, and how they map, how they are different, how you can create tension between them. And then from there, it's not a big step to think of visual of avatars, or a visual representation of a performer, sorry, a video representation of a performer versus the physical representation. And so I think this is more or less where the line, or this thinking about technology for me started, with the loudspeaker.
And to your mind, what is the role of new music in our society?
Phew, that's a super difficult one. I would like to think that new music is something that perhaps it's a bit of a banal answer to the question, but I would like to think that it is something that when you experience it, that it somehow does something to you, and that you take that with you, that it might, I wouldn't dare to say that it might change you, because I'm not sure if that is what it does, but that it somehow is a window that you can open when you experience it, and it shows, it makes you, it's like some kind of oxygen that makes you feel, that reawakens you somehow, that makes you feel really human, that really gives you the feeling of heightened liveness, that you yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I would have different answers to that question depending on when you interview me. In the morning I would probably give another answer.
I have a last question, right? Maybe you can give, what would be your like 3 tips to new composers, right, from your experience?
Dream wildly.
Free wildly, right?
Dream or think wildly. Take risks.
What do you mean by take risks?
Don't go for the, don't make decisions based on what you think the outside world will, how the outside world will react on your music. Just make decisions based on your own, what you are interested in, or what you think you should do. So in that sense, very often that's, if you think about audiences, or if you think about reception of a piece, or if you think about the context of a piece, very often you start to dumb down your ideas, or you start to take less risky decisions, because okay, perhaps it will completely collapse, and then I have written a piece and the audience will think it's shit, and they will think I'm a lousy composer. And so I think, that would be one of my tips, not to think about that, but just take your thinking to the edge and make decisions there. So those are 2. Take your time. I think that's a very, very important one too. I think it's really important that composers, I've had that conversation with many friends recently, that as a composer, you take your time to write music, and that you're not, because if you write, perhaps it's different for some composers, but for me, for example, if I would write one piece after the other like a machine, and I have had a time where I did that, I just started to feel really unhappy about my own work, because I noticed that I was just repeating myself over and over again. And it becomes very difficult to take time to reflect on what you're doing if you don't have that time. If you have to, or if you want to write piece after piece after piece and then boom, boom, boom. Some composers think through their music. Some composers think about their music when they're not writing music. So that's, of course, a very personal, individual thing. But I do believe that you asked me about young composers. Of course, it's important to make art and to try things out. And sometimes you just have to make it and see what happens with it. But on the other hand, also be patient and take your time and don't, yeah, I think that's important to keep your thinking fresh, to experience. Perhaps that's a fourth, if I can have a fourth one.
Yes, yes, yes.
I would also really advise young composers to look outside of the world of music, look at what happens in visual arts or in dance or in whatever other art forms there are. And if I can have a fifth one, it would be don't be afraid to collaborate. There you have it.
Thank you very much, Stefan.
You're welcome.